Right now, you probably think you know where the ocean ends. You walk onto a beach, drop your towel above the wet sand, and trust the sea to stay over there. Maybe a wave reaches your shoes. Annoying, yes. Civilization ending, probably not. Now imagine coming back next summer, and the beach is gone. The spring your family drinks from tastes salty. Your old fire pit is underwater. The path to your hunting ground has become a channel, and the hill where your grandparents are buried is slowly turning into an island. So what do? Do you leave the best fishing ground you have ever known? Do you move inland, where another group may already live? Or do you stay one more season and hope the ocean has finally finished rearranging your life? That was the problem ancient humans faced after the last ice age. For thousands of years, rising seas swallowed landscapes larger than modern countries. Most of the time, the disaster moved so slowly that you could pretend it was not happening. And then, one day, it stopped moving slowly. We will get to that wave. But first, you need to see just how wrong the ancient map looked. Around 20,000 years ago, so much water was trapped inside enormous ice sheets that global sea level stood roughly 120 meters lower than it does today. That is not a slightly wider beach. That is a missing world. Britain was not an island. You could walk from what is now England into continental Europe without getting your feet wet. Australia and New Guinea were joined together. Across Southeast Asia, huge areas now buried beneath the sea were forests, rivers, and grasslands. People lived there. They hunted animals along riverbanks that no longer exist. They gathered plants on plains now crossed by cargo ships. Children learned routes that are currently used by fish. The modern ocean floor was somebody's neighborhood. Then the planet warmed. The ice melted, water returned to the oceans, and the shoreline began coming for them. Now, you may be picturing a giant wave chasing screaming cavemen uphill. Honestly, that would have been easier to understand. A giant wave is terrible, but at least the instructions are clear. Run. Rising sea level was much more confusing. It took a strip of land, paused, then took another. A storm flooded your camp, but the water eventually drained away. The next storm reached farther. A grove of trees started dying. A familiar spring tasted a little strange. And the rise was not perfectly steady. During one especially fast period around 14,600 years ago, the global ocean may have climbed close to 18 meters in roughly 5 centuries. 5 centuries sounds slow because none of us expects to be around for the ending. But your family would feel it. Your grandparents remember hunting beyond a distant ridge. Your parents remember camping beside it. You know that same ridge as a narrow island where birds nest. 3 generations can watch one familiar landscape become 3 completely different places. No one wakes up and announces that the world has ended. The world just becomes less recognizable every year. Was this the moment to leave? Probably. But people are spectacularly good at waiting until a problem becomes more inconvenient than denial. And the coast gave them every reason to deny it. Shorelines were full of food. Fish arrived in huge numbers. Wetlands attracted birds. Shellfish sat in one place and made almost no effort to escape, which is exactly the attitude you want from dinner. Moving inland meant leaving all of that. Worse, it meant leaving your map. Not a paper map. You did not have one. Your map lived inside people's heads. You knew where deer crossed the river, which plants were safe, where to find flint, which pools still held water during a dry month, and which neighboring group preferred trading to stabbing. Your land was not just property. It was instructions. Move somewhere new, and suddenly you're the idiot. You do not know which valley floods. You do not know where animals migrate. You do not know whether the berries are food or a very colorful final decision. So ancient families rarely made one dramatic escape. They adjusted in steps. A low camp was abandoned during the wet season. A higher camp was used for longer. A temporary stop became a new home. Older people who remembered earlier floods pointed out safe routes. Relatives inland shared food. Maybe a neighboring group welcomed you. Maybe they did not. Because here is the uncomfortable part. When the sea removes land, it does not remove people at the same time. It squeezes them together. Now 2 groups want the same spring. 2 families want the same hunting ground. Everyone has children to feed. Everyone believes the land is theirs. And prehistoric customer service is not answering. Surviving the ocean, therefore, required more than walking uphill. You needed relationships. Marriage partners, trading allies, relatives, or at the very least a neighbor who did not throw a spear before hearing your proposal. You also needed memory. Who remembers the high route used during the flood 20 years ago? Who knows the inland spring that still runs during summer? who has relatives beyond a ridge. In a world without forecasts, warning sirens, or a helpful red evacuation line on your phone, an older person's story could be the difference between a strange family legend and extremely useful survival instructions. Imagine being the child who keeps hearing about a huge flood you have never seen. Do you believe it? Of course not. Adults are always exaggerating. Then the sea reaches the old marker. Suddenly, the boring story becomes a map. But the strangest part is that the advancing sea was not always bad news. Before it destroyed a valley, it could improve it. Salt water entering low ground created lagoons, reed beds, mudflats, and estuaries. Those wetlands could explode with fish, shellfish, birds, edible plants, and animals coming to drink. The sea was destroying your future home while upgrading your current dinner. Would you leave? That question mattered enormously in Doggerland, the vast drowned landscape beneath today's North Sea. Doggerland once connected Britain to mainland Europe, and it was not an empty bridge that people hurried across. It had rivers, lakes, forests, marshes, animals, and human communities living very comfortably in the exact place where the North Sea now sits. We know this because, occasionally, the sea gives their belongings back. In 1931, a fishing boat dragged up a chunk of peat from the seabed. Inside was a beautifully carved barb point made from red deer antler, roughly 13,000 years old. Think about that. Someone selected that antler. Someone shaped every barb. Someone carried it across dry land, probably to hunt or fish, and then lost it. The ocean arrived later. More tools and animal bones have since come up from the North Sea, while modern surveys have revealed buried rivers beneath the seabed. Somewhere below the boats, cables, and waves are the remains of camps that could tell us exactly how people responded, which is slightly inconvenient for archaeologists. Stone tools buried in a dry cave are easy. An entire homeland under 30 meters of dark. Moving water is archaeology on hard mode. But what we have found makes one thing clear. These people were not standing helplessly on the shore, waiting to become fish. At Bouldnor Cliff, near the Isle of Wight, divers found an ancient site now sitting about 11 meters underwater. The mud preserved worked timber, string, flint tools, and roasted hazelnuts. There was even evidence of surprisingly sophisticated woodworking, possibly connected to boat building. These people saw a watery world forming around them and learned how to move through it. That changes the whole story, doesn't it? If you only know land routes, a new channel is a wall. But if you have a canoe, understand tides, and know people on the opposite shore, that same channel becomes a road. The sea separated communities. Boats stitched them back together. And as coastlines broke into islands, those skills became more valuable. Fishing knowledge mattered more. Cordage mattered more. Reading tides mattered more. A person who knew when a channel was safe to cross could be as important as the best hunter in the group. The same pattern played out on a much larger scale in Southeast Asia. The flooding of the Sunda Shelf erased an enormous expanse of exposed land, dividing forests, separating populations, and turning old walking routes into sea crossings. Picture two families looking at the same new channel. One sees the end of the known world. The other owns a boat, understands the current, and has cousins waving from the opposite bank. Same water, completely different problem. The people most likely to survive were not necessarily the strongest. They were the least trapped by one way of living. But you can adapt to salt water and still die of thirst. Around 8,000 years ago, a village called Atlit Yam stood beside the Mediterranean coast of what is now Israel. Its people farmed, fished, kept animals, built stone structures, buried their dead, and dug a deep stone-lined well. Today, that village lies offshore beneath roughly 10 meters of water. And the well tells you how it ended. As the sea moved closer, salt water entered the freshwater below the village. The well became unusable. Eventually, people stopped treating it as a source of life and began throwing rubbish into it. Can you imagine noticing that change? You lower a container into the same well your parents used. You pull it up. You drink. Something is wrong. The disaster is no longer a distant shoreline. It is in your mouth. For mobile hunter-gatherers, leaving was painful. For settled villagers, it was brutal. A field represented years of work. A house held stored food. A well required labor. Graves held family history. You could not simply pick up your entire village and carry it uphill. Farming made people more productive. It also made them heavier. So when did they finally leave? We cannot know the exact conversation. There was probably no calm village meeting where everyone agreed that the data looked concerning. Some people want to go early. Some would insist the water had risen before. Someone would point to the dying trees. Someone else would point to a great fishing season. You know, humans. The families who survived were the ones who eventually read the signs correctly. Salt in the well, storms reaching farther, beaches narrowing, floodwater staying longer, freshwater plants disappearing. They did not need to understand melting ice sheets. They just needed to notice that the sea was winning. Most of the time, it won one season at a time. Then came the wave. Around 8,200 years ago, an enormous section of the seabed off Norway collapsed. The underwater landslide triggered the Storegga tsunami, sending waves racing across the North Atlantic. If you lived on a low coast, there was no slow argument now. No salty warning. No final season to think about it. The ocean simply arrived. Along parts of Scotland, the water surged far inland. Camps, boats, food stores, animals, and people may have been swept away. For anyone still living on the remaining low ground of Doggerland, this was the nightmare version of everything their families had feared for generations. Imagine surviving a coastline that had been shrinking your entire life, then watching the horizon stand up. That is Storegga. It is tempting to end the story there. One giant wave destroys Doggerland. Britain becomes an island. Dramatic music credits. Except real history is annoyingly untidy. The tsunami was catastrophic, but it probably did not erase every surviving piece of Doggerland in one clean strike. Some land remained. Some people may even have returned afterward. Honestly, that makes the story worse. A single apocalypse gives you a before and an after. These people got generations of terrible decisions. Stay or leave. Return or keep moving. Trust the rich marsh today or the rising water tomorrow. Carry the old way of life inland or become something new. They could not save the land, so they saved what the land had taught them. They carried tools, fishing skills, routes, stories, relatives, and children into new places. One person knew the inland springs. Another understood the tides. Another could make cordage. Another remembered where people had gone during an older flood. No heroic caveman solved sea level rise alone. The real survival technology was the group. So here's the full picture. The Ice Age locked water away and exposed enormous plains. Warming released it. Families shifted camps uphill. Wetlands offered food and trapped people near danger. Doggerland slowly broke apart. Bouldnor's woodworkers learned to live with water. Atlit Yam lost its well. Storegga turned a slow disaster into one horrifying day. And when the old coast disappeared, its people built lives along a new one. Now look at your beach again. That line where the water meets the sand is not a permanent border. It is just where the ocean has paused today. Beyond it lie drowned rivers, forests, tools, camps, and thousands of human lives that once felt completely secure. Your ancestors survived because they learned something we still struggle to accept. Home is not only the ground beneath you. It is the knowledge and the people you carry when that ground is gone. The land moved. So we did. And if you enjoy discovering how ancient humans survive problems that still feel uncomfortably familiar, you are welcome to stay for the next story.